This is Mignon Fogarty from the Grammar Girl podcast, and congratulations, Ryan and Amy, on your 100th episode. That is such a fabulous milestone. I'm so happy for you. Good job.
Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture.
Today's episode, Surrogate Friend. This is our 100th episode, which is... Yeah, it's crazy. Go nuts. 100 episodes is insane. Remember that time that I said, do you want to start a podcast? And you said, yes. What's a podcast?
Do you know, Ryan, that sounds like a charming, exaggerated anecdote. It is not.
No, that's verbatim. I remember that conversation.
Yeah. It's probably, there may even be like actual evidence for it, because we probably had the conversation on Messenger. So it's probably still there somewhere. We were to just scroll
podcast
for
where
a
we just
really
talk about
long time.
etymology every couple of weeks? Yes, I do. What does any of that mean? I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah, you properly had to explain to me what a podcast was and why but basically, like, what kind of hooked it in for me was you said, I think it would be fun to do this thing that you and I are both interested in, and I went, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Because that is essentially what this is, you know.
That's
I
kind
like
of the
you.
whole thing.
We both like words. We think these things are interesting and cool. I wonder if anybody else wants to hear that.
Yeah. Turns out a handful of people do. That's rad.
Turns out a handful of people do, which is super amazing.
And beyond that, we have made loads of pod friends, either in real meet space and virtual interwebs communication space, which is awesome. And a bunch of them have agreed to help us out with contributing little clips and offering their congratulations and kind words and fascinating words and fun facts and all the rest. So that's cool.
Yeah, I'm a little bit put out by the fact that we are not the most interesting people on this podcast this week.
No.
Like, not even close.
Yeah,
we're not the most famous people on this podcast. We are not the most informed people on this podcast. We are definitely not the smartest people on this podcast.
No.
We're probably not even the most fun people on this pod. Like, really, Ryan? Why did we bother?
Yeah, this is the let's put ourselves in our place properly podcast episode. This is when we listen to all of the people who make us be like, oh right, yes, okay, that's what this stuff is supposed to sound like, and
that's what this stuff is supposed to sound
just
like.
in case, lest we get too ahead of ourselves and be like, 100 episodes. Now let's hear from real people who do real stuff and know things. Yeah. So throughout the episode, we're going to do a regular episode, but throughout it, we're going to have interspersed the little clips that we had. You heard Mignon Fogarty offering her much appreciated congratulations. So thanks to Mignon for that. And keep listening, because all the way through, I mean, hopefully you listen at least to the closing theme. But after that, we're going to hear from Dustin, who has a fantastic and very mellow, soothing read you bedtime stories podcast called Sandman Stories Presents, which is awesome. So he's closing things out after the closing theme tune. So stick around and listen to that. And then throughout, we're going to be just kind of peppering really interesting and smart people in amongst whatever it is that we do.
I think this is a really wonderful opportunity. Not that I am in any way, of course, sort of like ranking or giving precedence to one clip over the other, because they are all super duper awesome. But I think that when it comes to people who really know what they're talking about, we immediately think of Mark and Aven of The Endless Knot, who are actual academics as well as super lovely people.
Oh, fantastic
and
people.
Yeah, they were super lovely enough to make this little clip for us. So listen to this and enjoy the sound of expertise.
Congratulations on 100 episodes, Amy and Ryan. We've loved every minute of it. So, to help you celebrate, here's some etymological centenary fun.
The word hundred is actually a compound, the hund part going back to Proto-Indo-European kemtom, which also produced Latin centum, hundred, as in centimeter, a hundredth of a meter. That original K sound became H in Germanic languages because of Grimm's law, hence English hundred. The red part of hundred, from pi r to fit together, means number or reckoning, so hundred literally means the number hundred. The hund part itself has two components. The first part means 10, decum, in Proto-Indo-European, and gives us both the word 10 and words such as decade and decimal. And then it has the suffix on the end, which raises it from 10 to 100. So the Pi word for 100 would originally have been decentum before being reduced to kimtum. This 10 root, decum, by the way, gives us the teen part of 13, 14, and so forth, and also the T part of 20, 30, and so forth, meaning literally 2 tens, 3 tens.
Of course, speaking of 100, 100, at least in Germanic languages like Old English, did not, in fact, originally mean 100. It originally meant 120. But when Latin arrived on the scene with centum, referring to the number 100, the word hundred eventually changed its meaning. To avoid confusion, the two ways of counting can be distinguished, with a newer count called tentywise, that is, by tens, and the old sense of hundred called the long hundred. Many have speculated that this implied that early Germanic peoples used a base 12 system, but this is only sort of true. Another piece of evidence for this is that 11 and 12 are different from the other teens, not 1 teen, 2 teen, 13, but they're still reckoned from the 10. So 11 means literally 1 left after the initial count of 10, and 12 is similarly 2 left after the initial count of 10. So it's still really a base 10 system.
And speaking of Proto-Indo-European, the Latin word centum is used to refer to one of two large groupings of Indo-European languages, the other group being Satem languages. This refers to a particular sound change that happened differently to these two groups. Basically, there were originally 3 varieties of K-like and G-like sounds in Pi, but these were reduced to only 2 varieties in most branches of Indo-European languages, but the sounds were merged in 2 different ways. In centum languages like Germanic, Celtic, Italic, and Hellenic branches, the palatal and velar versions were all collapsed together into the plain velar sounds like k and g, and the labial velars like qua and gua remain distinct. But in the Satem languages like Indo-Iranian and Balto-Slavic branches, those labial velars merged with the plain velars, and the palatals remained distinct, later becoming affricates like ch or sibilants like s and sh. And that's why centum and satem are used to refer to these different groups. They both come from the same Pi word for 100, but Latin centum is an example from the centum group in which the palatal became a plain velar, and satem, which comes from the Iranian Avestan language, is an example of the satem group in which the palatal becomes that sibilant s.
So for more etymology and history, you can find us at our podcast, The Endless Knot. And once again, congratulations on reaching 100 episodes. And we look forward to finding some more interesting etymological nuggets for your 200th, 500th, and 1000th episodes.
And speaking of people with expertise, and there's a connection here as well, because Mark and Aven's show is all about strange connections and interesting little threads that you can tie things together, entanglements, an endless knot, if you will, and you will. But Mark and Aven were 2 of the first people that I sort of met on Twitter, setting up the social media side of the podcast. And it was staggeringly, like we're not particularly anybody right now, but at the time we were not. We had done like 3 months of this and that was it. And Mark reached out over Twitter and said, hey, do you want to come and speak, ? At a linguistics conference, enormous ? Or a big like educational podcasting conference in Boston at Harvard. Big and terabang in my head.
The biggest.
And so weirdly, we both were able to get to Boston.
That in itself was pretty wild, because I remember you were like, holy shit, this thing has happened. And I was like, well, dude, there is no way I can come to Boston right now. And
it's
then,
a ways from Scotland.
Yeah, and then suddenly I could, basically because my mum was really excellent and said, let's take a trip to Boston. And and you made the ridiculous drive, and I got on the plane, and that happened.
And at Sound Education, we got to record a couple guest episodes, one of which was with the incomparable and amazing Kevin Stroud of the History of English podcast.
Such a gentleman.
I think I don't think that it's an overstep to say that if, like, between Mark and Aven inviting us to that conference and kind of being helpful guiding lights and Gandalfs and the early days of us doing this, if it wasn't for them and then for Kevin, I don't know that, well, we certainly wouldn't have listeners, really, because shortly after, I mean, we have many, many, many people who listen to us exclusively because Kevin was good enough to shout us out on his feed after Sound Education with our that guest episode. So we are delighted and thrilled and honored and humbled that Kevin has decided to contribute another awesome little bit of wordy, languagey knowledge on you. And that's what we're going to hear right now, is Kevin Stroud of the History of English podcast.
Get prepared to make the satisfied academic noises.
Hi, Amy and Ryan. This is Kevin Stroud from the History of English podcast. Congratulations on 100 episodes. It seems like it was only a few weeks ago that we were sitting together in Boston talking about the etymology of spoons and mystics and other such things. And thanks for inviting me to make a small contribution to this episode. I mean, did you think I would say no? Of course, that's a rhetorical question. And did you know that English once had a specific punctuation mark to indicate that a question was rhetorical? Back in the late 1500s, when the modern punctuation system was emerging thanks to the printing press, an English printer named Henry Denham introduced the idea of using a specific mark to indicate that a question was rhetorical. If the question called for an answer, he used the regular question mark. But if the question didn't call for an answer, he took the regular question mark and reversed it, and that became the mark for a rhetorical question. He called it a percontation point, but it fell out of use in the 1600s. Interestingly, in the 1800s, a couple of French writers proposed using essentially the same mark to indicate an ironic or sarcastic statement. It was called an irony mark, or in French, a point d'ironie. Of course, that mark never gained widespread acceptance, but it certainly would have come in handy in the modern era, where we do so much of our communicating through texting and emailing and commenting on social media. Sarcasm never seems to translate very well on those platforms, and that backwards question mark would really come in handy today. Oh well, I guess we'll just have to make do with emoticons. But again, congratulations to both of you, and here's to at least 100 more episodes.
And now, would you like to take it away?
I will absolutely take it away. So, no one could ever accuse me, ever, of not being quite incredibly cheesy. You know, I think that's the thing. I am a sentimental sap of a human being, and I have the sense of humour of, you know, a not very mature person, quite frankly. And so I decided I was going to choose this word before I'd even really investigated it to see if it was interesting. And my immediate response was, Amy, that is super cheesy. And then I thought, fuck it. Who doesn't like cheese? You know?
That's right.
Cheese is one of the most delicious inventions of the universe. And I feel genuinely bad for people who, for, you know, like dietary reasons, can't eat cheese. I really, like, my heart goes out to you if you are a person for whom cheese is not an enjoyable pleasure. And so the word that I decided to choose for episode 100 is friend.
Oh.
Quite simply because, as I mentioned earlier, the whole reason that this podcast exists is because I have a really great friend. And that really great friend said, hey friend, do you want to do this cool thing with me? And without that situation, none of us would be here. So, friend, cheesy or otherwise, is what I'm going to talk to you about today. And of course, that very excellent friend is you. But as you mentioned, we have been so overwhelmed by how nice podcasting people are. You know, genuine, friendly, welcoming, just all round good, how can we help each other out people. So for that reason, I thought this was a really appropriate word to talk about today. And I also thought it was really interesting. And the OED, the place to go, of course, the OED says, in terms of its origins, a word inherited from Germanic. And I thought that was a really cool place to start, considering that we're talking about the word friend. I don't know if you've been to Germany, but man, people are friendly there. Partly, I think, partly my whole friendly experience of Germany comes from the fact that I am a big fan of beer. And I generally find that people who are big fans of beer, they tend to be super friendly and nice too, like podcast people do. So if friendship is something that we inherited from Germanic languages and from Germanic cultures, that's absolutely fine by me. It's defined by the OED, first of all, as a person with whom one has developed a close and informal relationship of mutual trust and intimacy, more generally, a close acquaintance, often with an adjective indicating the closeness of the relationship as best friend or good friend, close friend, etc. So I think probably the adjective I need to add to our particular friendship would be, amongst other things, word friend. So this is making me think of The In-Betweeners. I don't know if you know this show particularly.
I know of it, but
you know of it because Greg Davies is in it. Yes. Yes, but they have it. So it's about a group of teenage boys attending school and just being sort of late teenage boys in England, and they mercilessly rip the piss out of each other at every single opportunity. And one of the sort of running jokes that they make, one of them sort of says hi to somebody in the passing, and the rest of them are like, "Who's that? We don't know them. Who are they?" And eventually the kid says, "Oh, he's my friend from football," and they all go, "Oh, football friend." So in that regard, or in any other you fancy, I think you are definitely my word friend. As well as that, you are my Canadian friend. You are my drummer friend. You are, there's so many adjectives that I could use, I could add into this word. The earliest citation of the word friend given in the OED made me really, really happy because it's from Beowulf. And
oh, sweet.
Beowulf was a proper learning experience for me. I was lucky enough to come across Beowulf at university as an undergraduate, where the English department at St Andrews University thought that it was important that every single English undergraduate should have a bit of an education about Old English texts. And they were really big on Beowulf for several different reasons. First of all, the edition that we studied from had been edited and translated and written by a guy who had been a scholar at the university for a long time. At that point, he was, I think, quite recently departed, and people were quite kind of almost sentimental about how this was his book, and it was a real shame that he wasn't teaching at the university anymore. The other thing that really, really got me excited about Beowulf was the excellent Michael Alexander, who was a professor of English at the university while I was there. And possibly the coolest thing, I mean, there are a lot of cool things about this guy. He was a good lecturer, but he was, in turn, he had been lectured by Tolkien.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I like to think that Tolkien is my grand lecturer. And
you're a grand professor. That's awesome.
Yeah, grand professor, exactly. So even before I started reading Beowulf, even before I got super duper caught up and rabbit holed by Old English, which is, just fascinating. Even before that, it was a cool thing to be reading. And I was so excited to see that English had changed so much. So it's probably one of the texts that really got me interested in etymology. I think it's pretty appropriate then that this first citation comes from Beowulf. And you know how we feel about the reading of the Old English? We like to give it a good mangle. So I'm going I'm going to have a go at this. I'll read the citation that's given. Heorot inan was freundum affilled, which basically means Heorot was full of friends. And this podcast is also full of friends. So well done, completely accidental, very satisfying etymology point.
Yeah.
And it also made me really happy that friend, it's not only it's a super duper old word, because often when we look back at words, we find that they started off nice and then, history kind of got to them and human beings were human at them. And before you know it, there's terribleness and, problematic representation and all of that stuff going on. Yeah. But friend is a word that's pretty much stayed friend. It's kind of meant the same thing for all that time. Because, we as human beings, we are not solitary creatures. We need other people. We like to have other people. So all the way through to the citation in 2002, we're talking about that close and formal relationship of mutual trust that the OED defines. There are lots of interesting sort of nuances as you look through the definitions. There's used in the subscriptions of letters, as in your affectionate friend, your cordial friend, so that sign off. We get a person who's not hostile or an enemy, as in friend and foe, friend or foe. The person who takes the same side as another in a war or a contest or a debate, so like an ally, rather than the sense of, we know each other well, just we're on the same team. We have a close relation, a kinsman or a kinswoman. This is something that seems to have eventually kind of centralised itself in Scots and Irish English, Northern Irish English, where people will use the word friend as a sort of an interchangeable term for a relation. I mean, it is well documented that Scots and Northern Irish Scots and the language used in the north of England is pretty awesome. I mean, count me as hugely biased within that situation, but I really do love me some Scots, and I really do love me some regional variations. And I was absolutely fascinated to hear this clip from Sadie. First of all, because I love other Scottish people doing podcasts. Yay for the Scots. And particularly yay for the Scots language. So have a listen to this. I have some thoughts once you've heard it. And yeah, thanks so much to Sadie Ryan. This is a cool little clip.
Hello, this is Sadie from the podcast Accentricity. I've thought long and hard about this and I've decided to tell you about the word Shan. So it's a word that was used all the time in my high school in Edinburgh, but I've never heard it anywhere since. I'd actually be really interested to know whether or not you've heard it, Amy, because I don't know whether it is really specific to the place I grew up, or whether it's actually more widely used and I just maybe haven't come across it in Glasgow, which is where I live now. So it's a way of expressing sympathy. So you can say, that's Shan, and it means something like that's a shame or that's unfair. So for example, if someone was getting picked on, you thought I'd gone too far and you wanted them to stop, you could say, stop doing that, that's Shan. Or that's pure Shan, you'd get quite a lot, which is like an intensifier, so that's really, really unfair. Or also if someone's dog had been run over, you might say that was Shan. And then kind of by extension, you can also say that something is rubbish. So if you can use it to say something's rubbish. So you could say someone's shoes or clothes are Shan, and that means that you think they're a bit crap. Or you could say like, that tattoo is a bit Shan, means it's a bit crap. So as I say, at school I heard this word like every single day, but then I left school and never heard anyone else say it ever. But I did come across it many years later in a book called Travellers in Their Language, which lists it as an example of a word used in Scottish cant, which is one of the languages used by Scottish travellers. So there were some kids from traveller backgrounds at my school, but they definitely weren't the only ones who used the word Shan. So I wondered if it maybe might have originated in Scottish cant and then moved into Edinburgh Scots. Also, my boyfriend speaks Gaelic, and he wondered if it could be related to the word shen in Gaelic, which means old. So you can kind of imagine how it might have gone from describing like old clothes to like shabby or rubbish clothes, and then maybe got transferred to like shabby and rubbish situations. Anyway, I think it's a great word because it kind of feels special and specific to the place I grew up. And because no other word that I know of does what it does. So I hope you guys enjoy it too.
So, it's very cool, this clip. And here are some of the things that I like best about it. First of all, I've never heard this word before.
Oh, okay.
So I need to point out, just for a little bit of context, this is maybe really obvious to some people, but maybe not really obvious to others. Scotland is not a large country. Okay? And I live in Dundee in the northeast of Scotland, and to get to Edinburgh, where Sadie is from, and you know, the area that she's talking about where the usage of this word is common, it only takes an hour to drive there. Okay? Just an hour, that's all. and I'm aware that, like, if you live in Canada, an hour's drive is sometimes to the local shop.
That's just breakfast, yeah.
Yeah. So to go to the kind of big smoke, as it were. So if you live in Dundee, that's going to either Edinburgh or Glasgow, or I suppose possibly Aberdeen, but they're all roughly about an hour away. So Dundee's a good place to get to other places from. And so she said, you know, is this a word that you know? Is it specific to Edinburgh? And I was really curious about that. So I did a wee bit of digging. I had a wee Google to myself. And what I found was that it seems that it is generally centred, the usage is centred in Edinburgh and in some parts of Fife. So Fife is the third largest kind of administrative region in Scotland. In terms of population, it's the third largest. And again, so I live in Dundee, but I work in Fife. And to drive to my work, it takes about 30 minutes. So Fife is literally over the bridge from Dundee.
Right.
And I was out last night with some friends. One of my friends, she's an English teacher, and she's from Fife, and she, you know, I thought she'll be a good person to ask about this. And I asked her if she'd ever heard this word before, and she said that she hadn't. But then she said, oh, but I mean, it might be a West Fife word.
Jeez.
She said this to me with like absolute serious, it might just be a West Fife word. And I was like, all right, okay. So again, just for a little bit of context there, Fife is 1,325 square kilometres. And yet, someone from the east of Fife is saying, I don't know that word, but perhaps in the west of this tiny place, they might be using that particular word that I've never heard of.
That's
why,
as a Canadian, that's nuts to me.
Yeah,
like,
that's why Scottish people are interested
bananas.
in accents, like Sadie's excellent podcast, because we have lots of them.
Yeah. It's just that's the thing that's genuinely baffling to me about the country of Scotland and the broader country of the UK, and just how, yeah, it's not a big place, but as you say, you walk for 15 minutes and you're like, oh, now I'm in a different place, like with different words for things, and people sound different here. Yeah, it's super.
That's
cool. Very cool, though.
I love it. It's one of my favourite things about where I'm from, is the richness of the language, and the variation. We then have a person who wishes another a cause well, so a sympathiser or a helper, a patron, like our excellent patrons, or a supporter. And an extended use, something that's helpful, reliable, or beneficial, something that improves or enhances a person's lifestyle, appearance, security, etc. And in later use, frequently in best friend. I quite like that best friend gets its own entry in the OED, because it is different, isn't it? You know, that having lots of friends versus a best friend. We then get the sense, which really hadn't occurred to me when I started reading about this, in Christian use with reference to God or Christ. So in the sense of a comforter or a supporter, but it made me think of that very, very old, slightly cheesy American hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. So
right,
the idea that God, Christian God, is a capital F friend, that also goes all the way back to the Dream of the Rood, an Old English text that I also studied at university, probably in that same module where we studied Beowulf. And the Dream of the Rood is just beautiful, just really, really gorgeous. We then have the sense of a member of a society that provides support for an institution. So a friend of the Louvre, a friend of Canterbury Cathedral, that sort of idea. And then an acquaintance or an associate, a stranger whom one comes across or has occasion to mention again. And it notes it sometimes uses a polite or occasionally ironic form of address. And even this shade has an Old English citation from the West Saxon Gospels. Friends and the various meanings of friends, they haven't changed. They've been this way for as long as English has been English. In fact, before English as we know it has been English. We then get the idea of a romantic or a sexual partner, a lover. This contributes to this sort of sense as in the saying gentleman friend, which I enjoy a great deal. A friend of mine recently went through a divorce and breakup and all that sort of stuff, and these days she has a gentleman friend, or sometimes I call him her gentleman caller, and she finds this absolutely cringeworthy, squirmy, and at the same time hilarious. So a lady friend or a gentleman friend. And of course, again, one that didn't occur to me, the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers, who not only does the name of the kind of religious movement contain the word friend, but I wasn't really aware of this, but the many citations given have it as a form of address. So, well, I opined friend Franklin must have known. So So friend Paulson, onward. Friend can also be used to describe a Quaker, a member of the Religious Society of Friends. And the other one that I found really interesting was your friend specifically was a person chosen to be one's second in a duel. That dates from 1709. Modish came with his friend to the place of combat. There the principals put on their pumps. I have a vague and, I think entirely irrational and unfounded fear that one day someone will ask me to be their second in a duel. And, even historically, that's unlikely. Even if I was a woman in the 18th century, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. But there is a part of me that always thinks, oh my God, what would I do? Ugh. Like, I don't know. I'm not just trying to keep that fear in the realms of just my crazy mind, but I am not well coordinated and I'm really bad at anything that involves aiming. So I feel like I would really be the last person on anybody's list. But occasionally administrative mishaps happen, and people end up doing jobs that they just weren't prepared to be doing. And there's a part of me that thinks, oh God, that could be me. I could end up in that horrible situation. But thankfully, it hasn't come just yet. We also have the euphemistic sense, friend being used to describe menstruation. My friend is here. I've got my friend.
Okay.
And another really cool one that I wasn't aware of because I'm not a climber, but rock climbers use, again, a capital letter friend. It's a spring-loaded calming device used for protection. And you would one of the citations given is, I placed a friend, an expanding calming device in the crack and clipped it to the blue rope. So one of these amazing little doohickeys that enable people of great fitness and coordination and skill to make these incredible descents. Yeah. And we also have because technology moves us forward and ways of connecting with people change over the centuries, even if the sense doesn't change too much, a contact on a social networking website. It's pretty cool to think that one single website has, I mean, you know, we could talk about the reach and the impact of Facebook in many, many contexts, some far more sinister than others, but it's quite cool that an entire new adjacent definition for this word has come from this one single website. And last but not least, we have the sense of well-disposed, friendly, or not hostile. So just basically people who don't seem like they're trying to stab you with anything. And this citation here is from Old English. So we've had this word for a long time, which makes me really happy. We've all had friends throughout history. Because let's face it, history is terrible.
History is terrible.
Yeah.
There's one more sense and use of friend that I'm not sure it goes beyond the Atlantic or even south of the border in Canada, but in a courtroom setting, we would use the word friend to refer to the other lawyer.
Ah.
So if you're doing submissions to the judge, because in a courtroom setting, you're always addressing the judge.
Sure.
Like that's where you're never, the lawyers are never arguing with each other. They're never talking to each other.
Arguments.
They are talking to the judge. They're
Sure.
presenting all the arguments and all their submissions to the judge. But when referring to opposing counsel, you would say, as my friend is aware, this is the law on this, or my friend submits that this is the case, but I would argue that this is blah 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 or whatever, right? But that's at least in the Canadian courtroom setting, that's the etiquette of how you refer to the other lawyers. And I'm not sure if I don't know if it's a Commonwealth thing. I don't know if exists beyond the Canadian setting, but that's
super cool.
One more use of that.
I like that for two reasons. One, because it sounds incredibly Canadian and fits beautifully into your national stereotype of Canadians being incredibly friendly and apologetic and helpful, good people. But also, I'm wondering if when we first started recording this podcast, you would even have been aware of that usage of the word.
No, certainly not.
So, yeah,
which is
that's
interesting.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Turns out we do live and learn.
Yeah. Amazing, huh? Weird. And it's interesting because there's actually quite a lot of words that have come down through legal lexicons, possibly because lawyers are very fixated on writing everything down and getting everything in writing. So it's always
sense, I suppose.
Keeping records and stuff. Which brings us to a clip that was generously provided by Dr. Clair Hardaker, who has a podcast called On Clair, which is a forensic linguistics podcast. And she has a cool word with a legal connection to offer us in her clip. So let's hear it.
Hi, my name is Dr. Clair Hardaker, and I'm the host of the podcast On Clair. That's a podcast about forensic linguistics, language mysteries, and more. And the word I've chosen for Lexitecture's 100th episode anniversary is inchoate. INCHOATE. Now you might wonder, why would I pick a word like this? Because interestingly, it's a favourite of lawyers, and they use it quite a lot. It basically means something that's just begun, it's in its early stages, it's elementary, it's imperfect, undeveloped, immature, these kinds of things. I'm reading those definitions from the OED just to make sure I'm absolutely correct. But what's happened, interestingly, with inchoate is it's suffered from what's called a rebracketing error. So what people have done is they've imagined that the in is like the in incomplete, and they've assumed that what you can do is you can chop the in off and make the word complete, or in this case, that you can make the word coate, meaning completed, finished, perfect, polished. And interestingly, there's a judge out there who's a bit of a pedant, who, for whatever reason, has realised that this is a rebracketing error, that technically the in is not a morphological prefix, as it's known. This judge has realised that this is a complete word. It just happens to have an in at the beginning. And every time the word coate appears in their court, for whatever reason, this judge has a bit of a freak out and a bit of a linguistic pedantry, prescriptivist rant at these people. And so these rebracketing errors occur all the time, and it just happens to have occurred with this very interesting, fairly rare word, inchoate, which originates in about the 1500s. And more recently, we have just chopped the in off the beginning to create a whole new word. Thank you very much.
So Etymonline has this to say about the word. My God, this website has been a friend to me throughout this podcast, and continues to be so. It's probably the number one website that I would go to. I mean, I use it for all sorts of quote-unquote important reasons too, but it's also a website that I know I will be able to spend time on whatever else is going on. Like if I was waiting for a bus and thinking, oh, spare dead time, what's on the internet? Etymonline is a place where I hang out just to see what they're talking about on that particular day, because it's such an amazing resource. It's so brilliant. So, Old English friend, friend, and let's not mash Old English pronunciations any more than we have to. Haha, she says, fully intending to do some further mashing. One attached to another by feelings of personal regard and preference. I quite like that preference sense. Like, I like you, but also I like you better than everybody else.
Right, yeah, it's a comparative thing.
To be hanging out with a random human, well, you know, probably not. I'd rather be spending time with you.
Yeah.
So it comes from Proto-Germanic, such a mash of letters and words, Frijojans, Frijojands, meaning lover or friend, which is also the source of a variety of Germanic languages. Old Norse frendi, Old Danish frund, Old Frisian frund, Dutch vriend, Middle High German frund, German Freund, Gothic Frijons or Frijons friend. And ultimately all of these Germanic words come from a common root, a little helping of pi, Proto-Indo-European, as we talked about last time. And the pi root is P-R-I, and it means simply to love.
Oh,
the University of Texas at Austin Linguistics Research Center Indo-European Pi Etymon and IE Reflexes site, which seriously needs itself an acronym. It defines this particular root as to like, to feel friendly or well disposed to. But Etymonline has it as love. I think, you know, there's not a huge leap between those two definitions, but I was interested to find that they were just slightly different. And Etymonline notes that in some languages, this pi root developed derivatives with the sense of free, as in not in bondage. And it says perhaps via beloved or friend being applied to the free members of one's clan as opposed to slaves. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of variation regarding what people define as friendship. Not being enslaved, that seems to me a pretty low bar. But, you know, history.
Yeah.
I tell you what, instead of literally owning you, how about we become friends?
Those are the two choices, though.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Lifelong servitude, unpaid. I can basically, I have the power of life or death over you, or, you know, friends.
Friends.
Now, Etymonline has the following list of cognates, some of which I'm going to talk about a little bit more. So it says it forms all or part of afraid, affray, filibuster, free, freebooter, freedom, and friend. It's also the source of the Christian names Frederick, Winifred, Siegfried, Geoffrey. Big shout out to Geoffrey, because one of my brothers is called Geoffrey. Godfrey, and also the significant but not terribly well used first name Frigg. I am of course talking about Frigg, the wife of Odin.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, you know, as time has gone on, it's, I believe, become the word Freya, unless I am mixing up my Norse gods, which is entirely possible. Certainly not an expert in that. But the name Frigg, as in the wife of Odin, basically means beloved or loving. So it's a name that, you know, it's certainly retaining the meaning of the original pirate, even though, you know, language and etymology and time has not been kind to people called Frigg. It's also the root that gives us eventually the word Friday, which suits me entirely. Friday is hands down the best day of the week.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the weekend, but it's getting to the weekend, and yeah, I'm a big fan of Fridays. So the University of Texas at Austin has the same sort of list, but they have one interesting addition. They have the cognate belfry, Belfry. And I was a little bit curious about that because as far as I was aware, a belfry was the tower in a church where a bell is rung.
Yeah.
As in the phrase bats in the belfry. So knowing that the pi root means to love or to feel friendly towards, I was a bit confused about how that came to be. So I had a little look at this, and Etym points out that in 1400, a belfry was a wooden siege tower on wheels. Now, we do have, from the late 13th century, the sense of bell tower, but the wooden siege tower on wheels was literally the high place of security. This is the definition given here. I really love this. That which watches over peace.
Oh.
So we get bergen, which means to protect, from the pi root berg, which means to hide or to protect, and then the pi root pri, which means peace or love or friendship. So a belfry, the wooden siege tower, was that which watches over peace. And I really like that. So the cognates, interesting in lots of directions. We also have the word filibuster, which most people now, I think, are aware of filibuster in terms of the frankly awful American political kind of, I don't know, would you call it a technique?
Yeah.
Would you call it a custom? But
tactic.
Yeah, originally a filibuster was a pirate, a West Indian buccaneer of the 17th century. And this is a cool little etymology. I probably could have kept this for a whole other episode, but it's reckoned that it's probably ultimately from the Dutch vrijbuiter, Vrijbueter. And the form filibuster, which I think is very, very fitting given the kind of socio-historical context of the word, a little sprinkling of Spanish gets in there. A little sprinkling of French gets in there because, of course, pirates came from all over the terrible colonial world. So Spanish inserted the I in the first syllable, and French is responsible for the S, inserted but not originally pronounced. This is a common fact in 17th century French, after the analogy of words in which an original S was retained in spelling, although it had become silent in pronunciation. And we then, of course, get the legislative sense, which seems to have appeared about 1861. It says probably the extension in sense is because obstructionist legislators pirated debate or overthrew the usual order of authority.
Okay.
I think we can all agree filibustering's terrible. Pirates, historically problematic, although people do enjoy saying R. And yeah, a cool little piratical journey within the word friend. We also
you know what?
What?
You know what pirates also caused?
Oh, you know what pirates also caused?
I'm not going to tell you.
I'm not going to tell you
Amy's
either. I'm going to
you.
let the very excellent Paul Anthony Jones of Haggard Hawks explain his favourite fact about language.
So because of what I do on Haggard Talks, I'm quite often asked what my favourite word is, but I'm not often asked what my favourite word fact is, which I think is probably a more interesting question, especially considering I think I give a different answer every time I'm asked what my favourite word is, but I definitely know what my favourite fact is. because I think it's a lot of other people's who follow Haggard Talks, because it keeps cropping up in the mentions on the site, and it sort of does the rounds again, and people share the blog. It originally came out of some research that I was doing about the origin of the expression time immemorial, which originally was a legal term that described anything occurring before the 6th of July, 1189, which seems like a really arbitrary time, but it was actually the ascendancy of Richard I. So in other words, if you could prove ownership of something before Richard I came to the throne, then your legal ownership of it couldn't be questioned, and that's why this definition kind of came in. And I was researching this, and the document that introduced that rule also defined for the first time in English law what a shipwreck was. And the part of the document that describes shipwreck stipulates that if the ship's cat survives the shipwreck, then the ship isn't a wreck. So in other words, the rest of the crew could all be lost, but the legality of what happens to the cargo and the insurance and what happens to what's washed up on shore, all of that depends on whether the cat survives as much as anyone else. So the original document said that on a wreck of the sea, it is agreed that when a man, a dog, actually, for that matter, or a cat escapes alive from a ship, neither the ship nor the boat nor anything that was in them shall be adjudged a wreck. And this law was put down in 1275 and remained, I think, the legal definition of a shipwreck for a lot longer after that. And I think this remains my absolute favourite fact from Haggard Talks, is that if the ship's cat survives a shipwreck, then you haven't hit the legal definition of a shipwreck and the ship wasn't a wreck.
So at the end of the shipwreck, presumably it's only a shipwreck, presumably the cat has long since departed, but this is called a loan translation. Another cognate of the pirate pre is freebooter. So freebooter to Dutch vrijbooter, and then thanks to that sprinkling of French and Spanish, we get ourselves to filibuster. But freebooter is a kind of a more straightforward kimbap sort of word, where we have the pre part, meaning to love, and we have the boot part, meaning booty. So a freebooter loves booty. I am, of course, fantastic. Talking about piracy booty rather than, like backside booty, but I don't see why we have to limit ourselves to only loving one kind of booty. So we find ourselves quite far away from the original sense of friend, but it turns out that people like all sorts of different things. It might be that your sense of friendship is the truly rad, interesting guy who shares your quite frankly unacceptably geeky and interesting language and asks you to do a podcast with him. It could be a siege tower looking after the peace. It could be a pirate. And I was also interested to find that in that list of cognates, we get the word afraid, which seems to me as far away from friendship as possible. So I had a little look at this word too. The first part of the word is from the Latin ex, out of, the sort of a part. And the second part is Frankish afrithu, peace. So to be afraid is to be out of peace or out of love.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Also, it totally didn't occur to me, another one of these linguistic, of course it is now that you've pointed out to me, issues, that afraid, A-F-R-A-I-D, is the past tense of the word affray, A-F-F-R-A-Y. An affray, which is, of course, a fear, a terror, a state of alarm produced by a sudden disturbance. And again, that same sense of being out of peace, being out of friendship. That is an affray, and as we often see, it survives almost exclusively in its past participle, afraid, with the AI, because, spelling, just do what you like.
That's so cool.
So, friend, that's what I have to say about friend.
That's awesome. I afraid definitely jumped out at me from that list.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't until when you came back to it, and you were like, okay, and afraid, and I was like, okay, and I started thinking about it. I was like, oh, I hope that's what it is, because that's cool. But of course, never had occurred to me before that. But that's such a cool. Yeah, that's so neat. I like how it's one of those, is another one of those examples of just a different mindset came up with that, like a different worldview came up with that, like the because there's all sorts of reasons to be afraid, but ultimately, like it, that's what it comes down to. Is you're without friends, you're without peace, you're without camaraderie or someone to support you. You're like,
that comes from a time when peace was the default setting. You needed a word to point out not that thing.
Huh.
So, I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. They were different times. Simpler times, perhaps, better times. I mean, only better times if you weren't poor or a person of colour or...
It's a very, very narrow swath
demographic category here. The oldie days, as our mutual friend pointed out, the good old days really only belong to rich white people. For everybody else, they were just old days.
They're just the old days. Yeah, that's basically it. And even a small subsection of that. Like I'm a middle class, white,
titled,
cis,
nobility,
hetero male here. But I would have, like, well, what would you have been doing if you had been born 200 years ago? Well, I'd be blind on the street because glasses weren't around and I couldn't see for anything. So I'd be a beggar. Like, that's just how it would go.
I'm even in Scotland, even in like 21st century Scotland, I'm 40, so I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
Medieval Scotland, no chance. I would have had at least 12 children, assuming I'd even survived that long, and the 12 children would have severely limited the chances of that being a thing. So,
well, yeah, true enough. That's cool. Friend, neat word. I like it.
I mean, 40 is a pretty ripe old age. I think we can kind of all agree with that. I'm not aware of when it was that I started feeling like I was an old person, but I think part of it was a couple of weeks ago, my sister invited me to go out drinking with her, and I didn't want to, and she said that I was boring. And I said, like, I'm going to stay in the house and do some sewing. And I am super excited about that situation. At what point did you think I was not boring? But yeah, I think that's maybe more to do with who I am as a person rather than the age that I've reached. But another thing about being 40 is you are so far away from being down with the kids that it's not even funny. And it sometimes feels, it's like such an old lady stereotype to be saying this, but it does kind of feel that young people have their own language. And I'm kind of okay with that. I don't need to use the words that the young people do. But if you do want to use and understand the words that the young people use, here is a clip that will elucidate at least one of these words.
Hi, it's Martha from Away with Words, the public radio show about language. Say hi, Grant.
Hi. Congratulations to Amy and Ray of Lexitexture on 100 episodes. May there be hundreds more.
That's fantastic. Keep up the good work. Well, Grant, they asked us to share a little something on their language show.
We always have so many questions from listeners. Maybe we can pick from the mailbag.
Here's a good one. This one came in on Twitter the other day. It's from a Baltimore native who goes by the handle Great Risk. And they ask, hey, Grant and Martha, have you covered bussin' yet? As in, this grilled cheese is bussin'. Even though I'm too old for TikTok, I do know it means really tasty, but I'd love to know the origin.
Well, I don't think you can be too old for TikTok. Hey, it's the open internet. Anyone can be on it. But it is a really good question because I don't know that it's in any slang dictionaries in like a really complete way. So let's break it down and explore it. There's so much to talk about.
Well, first of all, it's not the bussin' that means kissin', is it? It's not a kissin' grilled cheese.
No, it's not. It's so good that you want to kiss it. I've had grilled cheese like that. But it's not
I have too.
It's not that one. No, if someone gives you a bus on the cheek, that's a kiss. But that's really old-fashioned, and this isn't that one. This bussin' is a form of busting. And busting is something done well. It's a positive act, like busting out in a successful way, or busting a move when you're really moving on the dance floor, or busting rhymes, doing great hip-hop lyrics, busting your butt, working really hard, busting loose, having fun. All of these bustings are positive bustings.
Okay, so it comes from African American English and hip hop?
Right. Yep. And it's still mostly there, but has entered mainstream English in some way.
Well, Grant, it's so interesting, isn't it, that there are so many other examples of slang and dialect words that are used for positive emphasis. I'm thinking of words like banging or slamming or whopping or striking.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're all about hitting, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's so unusual. Yeah, and I guess I would class this right in there. And it does go back to a kind of violent act because bussin' came from bustin', which came from busting, which came from bust, which is, might surprise a lot of people to find out, from the word burst, B-U-R-S-T, which is an Americanism, which is kind of cool, right? Or maybe I should say burst, begat, bust, begat, bursting, begat, burst. It's like a
Grant.
biblical lineage here.
Right. Well, speaking of biblical, let these people go, Grant. Hey, you can find us and our radio show on public radio stations coast to coast in the U.S. and on podcast at waywardradio.org or on your favorite podcast app.
Bye.
See ya.
That was awesome. That was A Way with Words, and we just want to send a special shout out to Martha and Gary for submitting that, and we really appreciated it. We were talking earlier, you had rightly pointed out that the number of incredibly nice and just friendly and just generous and helpful and encouraging people that we've met in the pod world has been pretty incredible. Like, people who have their own stuff going on to the nth degree, and they still are willing to help out. And the thing that still staggers me is the person whose little clip I'd like to play for you all now, because, talk about people who have their own stuff going on. Susie Dent, for reasons that frankly, I still don't quite understand, he immediately was like, yeah, sure, I'm in. I'd love to help out. And then did, while she was getting ready for her, like, decades-long, nationally syndicated and internationally streamed and distributed television career, to, like, say hi and say some nice things about us, and also share some really cool words with us.
I pointed out to you, like, obviously, you can imagine how ridiculously excited we were when this clip arrived. I'd like to pretend that I'm cool and was really chilled out about it, but I wasn't. Any means. I was very, very excited. Like everybody else in the UK, Countdown is an absolute staple of life. It was the thing that was on TV in the afternoons from a ridiculously young age. I remember watching Countdown because I was into words, and my parents watched it, and it was there that I learned the difference between a vowel and a consonant. And I think that's probably the case for the vast majority of British people. That's how they know. Yeah. Like, school does its bit and all the rest of it, but really, vowels and consonants, people go, right, like on Countdown. But yeah, it's just, as you say, people are incredibly generous with their time when they happen to be enthusiastic about the same thing that you happen to be enthusiastic about. And Susie Dent on TV, on Countdown, the lexicographer, and I remember when Susie started on the programme, and she was like the sort of young thing with a big dictionary, and finding out the word lexicographer, that was exciting to a little geek child like myself, and saying to my mum probably, what's that? And she said, it's a person who studies words. And for me, that was a, what? Like, that's a job? That's a thing that you can do?
Yeah. Crazy.
Hi Amy, hi Ryan, Susie here from my Countdown dressing room, just to say huge congratulations on the 100th episode of your fantastic pod. 3 words I'm going to give you today, kind of linked to celebration. The first is something that I urge you not to become. I know that you want a party to celebrate 100 episodes, but try and avoid being crambazzled, which, as many of my friends know by now, means prematurely aged from excess drinking. The other is you might indulge in a spot of Herkel-Dürkling. Brilliant word from old Scots for staying in bed long after it's time to get up. That's Herkel-Dürkling. And the third thing is just to keep inspiring. And I mention inspire because it has one of my favourite etymologies. At its heart is breathing. It's linked to respire, perspire, conspire. And it's the idea of breathing life and energy into something, which is what you do to the English language. So huge congratulations. And yeah, just to avoid the crambazzlement.
Another person that we have had some cool interactions with, and I actually got to meet briefly, and she has come on and done a guest episode with us and stuff, is Helen Zaltzman of the Allusionist podcast and a number of other great and long-standing shows that she's contributed to. She's been in the podcasting game for...
As long as that's been a thing.
As long as there's been a podcasting game, and it is, yeah, again, just same thing. No expectation that she would make time for us, but right away put the little tweet, just kind of shot in the dark, like, hey, I wonder if these people would be willing to do this. And Helen was like, for Lexitecture, for sure.
I always remember you on one of the first occasions of losing our minds due to things that have happened to us as a result of this podcast. And you had joined a Facebook group for people producing podcasts that was just a kind of a,
yeah.
Like, you know, if you have questions, if it's tech stuff or you're new to this or whatever, please, you know, shoot questions in. And that group was moderated by Helen, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you'd asked the question and she got back to you and you were like, holy shit, Helen is Helen Zaltzman. Helen.
The Helen. That's a thing. That was, what? Yeah. And now she's contributing cool clips about facts.
Yep.
To our little show, which
Excellent
is
little nugget.
Pretty rad.
Hi Lexitecture, it's Helen Zaltzman from the Allusionist podcast here, wishing you a very happy 100th. Congratulations, it's an incredible achievement. And to celebrate, I wanted to share something that, maybe you already know, but I only recently learnt about the word fact, which before it meant things that are true, or that's what I hope it still means, seems to be drifting somewhat with the will of the people. But originally, in the 16th century, it meant evil deeds. Evil deeds, that's what facts were. So what a turnaround. Who knows where it'll go next? Well, the worry is it'll go back to evil deeds and fake stuff. I guess we'll all be there to track its progress. Anyway, well done. Thank you for the pods. Bye.
So... this is also a cool thing. So the title writes itself, which is pretty wonderful.
I love when that happens, and it happens every time.
It does tend to happen every time. There's at least some connection there, which is pretty rad. My word today is surrogate.
Ooh.
So a surrogate being a substitute, someone who does something on behalf of, in place of, instead of someone else. Often you hear the term sort of a surrogate mother or a surrogate father for someone who sort of stands in the place of a parent, or more recently, because technology and science allows such things, someone who is sort of carrying a child on behalf of someone else.
Yeah, sure.
Being as surrogate as you could be. It exists in both noun and adjective form and has for quite some time. So you could be, that is my surrogate, or they could be your surrogate friend or mother or father or parent or cousin or whatever. It shows up in the OED at the very beginning of the 1600s. So
again,
not as old as friend.
I'm not sure how old I thought that word was going to be, but that seems earlier than I was expecting.
Yeah, I think I was slightly surprised by that as well. Although I didn't have, like you say, I didn't have a clear sense of. I'm not sure what I would have guessed.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think it would have been 1600.
Yeah, cool.
There's an obsolete form that shows up as early as the 1530s, and it was as a verb. So I would tend to take a guess that it would have been pronounced something similar to surrogate, but maybe that is. But if someone said, "How do you pronounce this?" If you made it a verb, you'd be like, "Well, you would surrogate someone," but maybe you'd surrogate them.
Yeah,
but it's essentially the
mean.
verb is to appoint a surrogate, to appoint a replacement or a successor or a stand-in or what have you.
Cool.
It comes from Latin. It comes from the Latin surrogatus, which is the past participle of surrogare, which means to put in another's place or to substitute. So we're still pretty much there.
Yeah.
It is an alteration of subrogare or subrogare, which apparently is the earlier form of the Latin word.
Sure.
And this is a compound. So it's got that sub prefix, which can either mean in place of or under. So like in place of it in words like substitute, or under in words like submarine, under the sea. And rogare, which means to ask.
To ask. This is just what I was thinking. As soon as you said it's from the Latin word, I'm like, pieces I recognise. Still don't really know how they come together to make that thing, though. Pray continue.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, there's an interesting thing about rogare here meaning to ask, and it has to do with its Proto-Indo-European, or Pi, root. And the Pi root that rogare is thought to come from means to stretch or to move in a straight line.
Ooh.
Which I thought was kind of weird. And where we get this is it's the Pi root is reg.
Right.
Reg. And it's where we get words like regulation.
Right.
Or regular. We also get erect, direct, reckless, as in, so if you're reckless, you're sort of deviating from the so-called straight and narrow, you're going off on your own. Rack, regime, and rectangle are all also from this word meaning straight or to stretch out. And that
rectilinear.
So that's
that's super cool.
So that's all well and good, but I was like, but ask. Like what? So on that Texan Picorni pie hoard, I wonder, brilliant online resource for etymology. Borf? Can we just call it Borf?
Borf. Brilliant online resource for etymology. BORFE.
I think that's what I'm just going to call it now.
I am
this is
absolutely down with Borf. I love
Later
how we just created a word and now it's a thing. I'm like, write that down somewhere. Borf.
We're going to get an email in like 3 months from someone who's like, what the hell are you talking about? Let's check Borf. It's not even like pie where it's an actual thing and we still forget that people don't necessarily know it because it's still really nerdy. Borf is, we just made it up. And anyway.
But this is the thing.
Apologize in advance.
This is the thing. Words, it amuses me greatly when people say, that's a made up word. We've talked about this before. We're like, yeah. They're all made up, dude.
They're all made up.
All of them. Somebody just made them up. And maybe they made them up based on a long line of scholarship, or maybe they just made them up, like Borf. And we now know what Borf means, and whoever listens to this particular episode of this particular podcast will know what Borf means. But I'm already kind of itching to Google that term, because I feel like there are other Borfs out there, and we just don't know about them yet. This is very much reminding me of Hedvig's excellent point that she makes in the clip, that we should let everybody listen to now from our excellent friends at Because Language. We did a guest episode with them before the podcast was called Because Language, but it's still the same very, very excellent. 3 people, lots of expertise, hilariously good fun. We had such a hoot doing that guest episode.
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah, it was like, just hanging out in a bar somewhere with cool people chatting about words.
Yeah, it was great.
And yeah, listen to what Hedvig has to say, and also to the whole clip.
Hey Ben, hey Hedvig.
Hello.
What are we doing?
We're doing a thing for Ryan and Amy because it's their 100th episode.
Cool. So do I take my clothes off now or later?
No. This isn't a Patreon thing. This is just for them.
Oh my God, gross.
Hi, we're Daniel, Ben, and Hedvig of Because Language, and we're here to answer the question, what kind of things do we love about language? I've got one.
I've got one.
Do you want to go first?
Well, in the brief it said anything word related. So one of my things that are word related is how you can learn the meaning of words in your own. You can learn what other people mean by a word even when you're above 20. So I think I've told it on the show before that there's 2 words in Swedish for everybody. And I thought they meant different things.
But they're just straight up synonyms.
They're straight up synonyms.
Do you mean like how in English we have everyone and everybody?
Sort of, yeah. There's samtliga and alla. And when you're on a train and you read you get to the end station, it's samtliga passengers get off the train.
Okay.
So I, for the longest time, thought that it was a special word that meant everybody except for the people who know it doesn't apply to them, i.e. the conductor of the train.
Ah.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that.
It doesn't mean that. It just means everybody. It's just but every time I heard it, it had this meaning.
All relevant people.
So I was like 25 or something when I explained this to an English speaker, I think, and a Swedish person was nearby and was like, hey, that's not true.
Just what? What was that?
Yeah, just like, no, that's not how that word works. What? How'd you get to that? So my favorite thing about language is that you can get by with an individual understanding of the semantics of a word well into your adult life. Probably you can get to 30s or 40s and you can still be fine-tuning your hive minding with your fellow speakers. Because the truth is that this didn't hamper me in any way. Like, I never had a problem. I never didn't get off the train.
Yeah, it was close enough for you to have never encountered any kind of error or problem with it.
It was only when I was explaining it, yeah.
Just like with evolution, you just have to do well enough to not die.
Yeah, and I was doing well enough to communicate and get by, so it wasn't a problem. So that's my favorite thing, is that it's not like you reach like 3 or 12 or 18 or whatever milestone you want to pick and you're like ready, baked and fully merged with everyone around you. It goes on.
Well, my favorite thing in English right now is ul. The ul sound, spelled L-E usually. Comes to us from Old English and it does a lot of things. One of the things it does is it functions as an instrumental. So you add it to a word to show that you're using that thing. For example, if you want to pick up a thing with your hand, what are you picking up?
A handle.
If you want to spin thread, you use a
spindle.
And if you use your thumb when you're sewing, you might want to use a
thimble.
Yeah, so that's one thing.
I like the thing that you love is just for a bunch of super archaic things that we absolutely don't use in any common... Well, handles, I guess, but the other two, like, let me just get my spindle and I'll put my thimble on first.
Fine. Well, you'll use these because this is the other thing ul does, is acts as a frequentative, and that means that you do it a lot or you do it very intensely. So, for example, if you hear a crack, you hear one thing, but if you hear a crackle, you hear a lot of things, right? So when you get a prick, it's one thing, but when you feel a prickle, it's a bunch of things.
Okay.
A spark is one thing, but frequentative, sparkle. Now you have to guess these. When you use your gob,
you gobble something up.
Yep.
Yeah.
When you joust with someone, but you do it a lot of times.
Jiggle?
Jostle.
Oh, nicely done.
What about if you have a nest and you're getting all comfy in your nest?
You nestle down.
Yeah. It even works with when you hack away at the price of something.
You heckle.
Haggle.
Haggle. It is. So it's so intuitive that even a child can understand it. My two daughters, one's 4 and one's 2, they both use the word huggle as a frequentative of hug.
Yeah. That is some of the cutest.
I want to huggle.
That's
so
very cute.
that's one of my favorite. Ben, with your perspective as the non-linguist on the show, do you have a favorite language thing?
I mean, it's just it's pretty OG, but in terms of like captivatingness, it's still just sign language for me. Anytime I am watching someone sign, it's like watching a campfire or watching like a bubbling brook or something. It is, I can just sit there and watch and watch and watch. You know how, I don't know if you guys have this, but if you happen to be at a pub or a bar or something and there is like a screen, it might be playing sport, or even if it's playing betting or something.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And those are both of those things, both gambling and sport, are activities that
boring.
Could not be lower on my personal list of interests. And yet I will still like be rude and stare up at that ceiling rather than make eye contact and converse with people, because I find it really engaging. And so it engages me, but I feel like the sign language is the non-evil version of that.
Well, Ryan and Amy, congratulations on episode 100 of Lexitecture. We hope to hear lots more from you.
Crack the century!
Yeah, amazing.
I'm on a mission now. This is like the game that we used to play when I worked in the call centre, where somebody else would give you a word and you'd be like, okay, I'm going to get that into my next call.
I had a class like that.
Brilliant.
We had this small business law for lawyers class, and it wasn't necessarily everyone's cup of tea. So this small group of us that had worked together on a group project early in the term, and therefore had already had set up like a WhatsApp chat or a Facebook Messenger group chat or whatever.
The infrastructure for anarchy was already in place.
It was already well established.
There's a tautology. No, sorry, not a tautology. There's a contradiction if ever I heard. Am I right? Is it a tautology?
The infrastructure of anarchy.
Yeah, the infrastructure of anarchy. I also feel like I might have seen that band in the early 2000s.
Oh, it's a good band name. But yeah, we did the same thing. It was like, as soon as you worked it into a question or a comment, you had to then assign. You just threw a word out into the group, and then whoever thought they could do it would just take a stab at it, and they got to choose the next word. It remains one of my best memories from law school. Like it was one of the best things that happened in school. It was amazing.
I mean, to be fair, it's probably the only day I ever enjoyed while working in a call centre. It stands out in my memory because it wasn't terrible like most of the other days were.
Like all other days working in a call centre, yeah.
Yeah, nobody was pleased to see me. It was a helpline for the Inland Revenue, the tax apparatus of the United Kingdom. Nobody ever phones that line in a good mood.
Oh yeah, no.
Like, no one's ever just like, hey guys, maybe you could help me with this thing. That is not a thing. Absolutely not.
But you know what we were doing in that small group to and for each other while we were throwing those words out to use? We were doing a thing that Bunny Trails, the fantastic podcast, we've mentioned them a couple times before. Their jam is idioms and turns of phrase and phrases and stuff, and looking at the origin of those.
So cool.
And they have a cool one that relates to what we were just talking about. So take it away, Bunny Trails.
Hello, word nerds. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh.
And we're the hosts of Bunny Trails, a word history podcast.
It's a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase.
Every week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today.
To help Amy and Ryan celebrate 100 episodes of Lexitecture, we want to take a look at the phrase egg on. According to Merriam-Webster's, quote, egg on means to urge or encourage someone to do something that is usually foolish or dangerous, end quote.
Here's an example sentence from Cambridge Dictionary. Egged on by his top aides, he was determined to win.
Or this one from Merriam-Webster's, he continued to take off his clothes while the crowd egged him on.
The Oxford English Dictionary defines the noun egg as, quote, the more or less spheroidal body produced by the female of birds and other animal species, containing the germ of a new individual enclosed within a shell or firm membrane, end quote. So how the heck do we go from that to encouraging someone to do something foolish?
Turns out that's not the form of egg that originated this phrase. Let's look at the verb egg from the Oxford English Dictionary. Quote, to incite, encourage, urge on, to provoke, tempt, end quote. This usage comes to us from Old Norse eggja. This also is the same origin of our modern verb edge, as in to give someone an edge, like to give a keenness or incisive force. It can also mean to put an edge on a weapon, meaning to sharpen it.
Egg, meaning to incite or encourage, has been around since the 1200s. The OED has the first attestation in the Trinity Cambridge manuscript of Homer, whereas our phrase egg on has its first attestation in Thomas Strand's 1566 translation of two of Horace's satires. Quote, I'll egg them on to speak something, which spoken may repent them, end quote.
So when you are egging someone on, you are using the root of an Old Norse word, not referencing the common breakfast food. If you want to hear more of us, you can find Bunny Trails, a word history podcast, on Pandora, Audible, Ghana, Spotify, Good Pods, pretty much anywhere podcasts live. Or find us at our forever home, bunnytrailspod.com.
Amy, Ryan, congratulations on reaching the 100 episode mark. It's a commendable achievement. We look forward to Bunny Trails being back on the show to help you celebrate episode 200 in a few more years. Until then, remember, words belong to their users.
We're basically playing this game for the whole episode, and I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I kind of feel like we should do this more often. Cool.
So that was quite a tangent and a couple of fantastic, amazing clips interspersed. But to finally set everyone at ease with how
that is quite the question
relates to a pi root of to stretch or straight or head straight out is basically from BORF, and that's the Texas at Austin Picorni Linguistic Center for Excellent Studies and Excellence in Linguistics or whatever.
Ryan, you just thoroughly negated the need for the word BORF. If we're going to go BORF, we have to go BORF.
Okay.
Just, like...
All in BORF,
own it.
As well as on the American Heritage Dictionary, as well as in an etymological dictionary of Latin that I have because I am a nerd.
Nice.
The idea here is that the connection between straight and stretch and ask is because when you are imploring someone, you stretch out your arms to them.
No.
Right?
I mean, yes, but also no.
And so that, and I was like, what? But yeah, like there are dusty volumes and weighty tomes that present that they're like, this is the thing. This is why we get the word rogare means to ask, because you are holding out, you are stretching out and reaching out to someone.
Brilliant. That's absolutely
asking
brilliant.
Them a thing. And so a surrogate is someone you have asked, you have reached out to ask them to stand in your place or do a thing for you. And that's where we get surrogate.
Incredible.
Right? I thought that was very cool.
I'm genuinely, I'm taking a minute to just let that land in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of nestle in.
Yeah. Super cool. Nice use of nestle.
So that was...
Loving it. I love the stretch out, asking for help, kind of just, rogations. That was the word that I thought of when you mentioned rogare. And
okay.
But so stretch out your arms, ask and you shall receive. Well, we certainly found that we asked and we received. We didn't really know when we put the word out. I say we, Ryan absolutely put the word out to say to all these excellent friends of podcast land, hey, could you perhaps help us out with our 100th episode? And, you don't always get what you expect. Like, for example, I did not expect in this wonderful wonderful clip from Lingthusiasm to be, well, intellectually trolled to within an inch of my life. But, you know, we asked.
It's fantastic.
And that's what we got. And I love it so much.
Hi, I'm Gretchen McCulloch.
And I'm Lauren Gaughan. And we are the co-hosts of Lingthusiasm, a podcast that is enthusiastic about linguistics.
We're enthusiastic about all areas of linguistics, but one thing that our listeners have commented on a lot is when we talked about conversational styles and how they're different among different people.
Conversation is all about the back and forth, but different conversations have different rhythms.
You might show that you're engaged in listening to someone by being really high energy and high involvement, or by being really considerate and leaving tons of space for the other person to talk.
We can see some of these differences in different people, or there might be a preference for one style or another in different communities. It's part of the stereotype of fast-talking New Yorkers and laid-back Californians.
Yeah, the key thing to know is that other people aren't trying to be rude when they have a different communication style from you.
We think it's such a fascinating topic that we wrote a whole Enthusiasm episode about it.
Conversation is so fascinating, whether it's studying it as a linguist or listening to a conversational podcast.
Happy 100 episodes of Lexitecture.
And stay enthusiastic.
I would love to think that Susie Dent sits down every Monday and listens to every episode that we put out. I'm pretty sure that's not the case. But but it was pretty clear from that clip that they definitely have listened to our podcast.
Yeah.
Maybe like once or twice, and they're just incredibly astute linguistics people, which obviously they're incredibly astute linguistics people, but
yeah.
You know, it is a really, it's a feature, it's a running joke, if you will. So yeah, they definitely, yeah, they listen to us. That's still weird, Ryan. It's still weird.
It's very weird. Neat though, but weird. The cool thing about doing this podcast, or one of the cool things anyway, is all the other pod people that we've met on Twitter and elsewhere, not just in the language pod and word nerd realm, but since we're on the topic of enthusiasm and being enthusiastic about stuff, thanks to Lingthusiasm, the next clip we have comes from Paul and Donna of the Varmints podcast, who are two extremely enthusiastic animal lovers. They will both be the first to tell you, and indeed the first thing they will tell you in this clip is that they're not animal experts, but, you know, they're pretty great people to learn about animals from, and they have generously contributed a clip as well. So we're going to listen to that now.
Hey, Ryan and Amy, congratulations on 100 episodes of Lexitecture. Woo! What a great milestone that is. My name's Paul. I'm not an animal expert.
I'm Donna, and I'm also not an animal expert.
And we are your buddies over here at the Varmints podcast. And we do a little etymology of our own on our podcast. We don't go into great detail like you guys do, but we do a little etymology.
Yeah, we like to know where the words for the animals come from.
Absolutely.
What did you pick out, Paul?
I picked out one of our favorite words from an episode that we did about walruses, and the word is walrus.
Can't wait.
Walrus first appeared in the 1650s. It's from the Dutch word, which is also walrus. And that is a combination of two Dutch words, walvis. Wal means whale and ros means horse. So whale horse. And that was probably a folk etymology alteration of a few Scandinavian words. So there was an Old Norse word called, I'm going to mess this up, Rossumhalver, which meant walrus, or Rostunger, which also meant walrus, and our personal favorite, Hrossfaller.
Yes!
Which literally translates to horse whale. Hrossfaller! It's such a fun word to say.
Yes.
It's really interesting. There is actually a mythological creature called Hrossfaller.
Nice.
And it is a horse-whale combination. It is said to wreak havoc in the seas around Iceland. It will strike its horse-like tail on the sea's surface in order to create lethal waves to drown seafarers and overwhelm boats. Which I guess if you've never seen a walrus before, I mean, it would probably freak you out because they're pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. They're pretty darn huge.
Hrossfaller!
That was such a fun episode, and I love
really
that word.
was.
The word was like the reason the episode was as fun as it was. I mean, not that the animal wasn't interesting, but just the Hrossfallers. Fabulous.
Wait, what was that word?
Crossfire!
What's your word?
My contribution is not nearly so historical, although I am a history nut, but it is the word nudibranch. Nudibranch.
Oh.
It is an animal we have not had a show about yet, but it came up in an episode that we did with a guest who was wildly amused by the word nudibranch.
I've always pronounced it nudibranch. I don't know why, but it's nudibranch?
Yeah. So I found it pronounced both ways, so I think they're probably both pretty much correct. Maybe one's the British pronunciation. I don't know.
Okay.
The nudibranch are those little sea slugs, those little guys in the ocean. They're a type of mollusk. They live in the ocean. Those colorful little guys with the ribbony sides and stuff, little sea slugs, those are nudibranches. And the word literally means having naked gills. And it is from nudi, meaning naked, from the Latin.
Nudie.
And branche from the Greek bronchia. Or bronche.
Little nudies.
Yep. So it actually means naked gills. It is plural of the branchian fin. And yeah, it's pretty cool. As we were laughing, I was like, I don't know. It sounds like it means naked. But does it? Yeah. I don't know. Because you can never tell, right?
Right.
So you have to go into the etymology and see what it is. But yet, it is nudie, naked gills. Nudie gills. Haha, nudie gills.
That's really the best.
It's just cute.
All right, Ryan and Amy, once again, congratulations on 100 episodes. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, that's a great milestone, and we are really, really happy for you.
Well, we've now reached the backside of this podcast, and so too much? I think so.
No, it's absolutely not too much. I'm just laughing, but I'm doing it quietly.
I don't think it's too much.
I don't know why. That would be maybe like the first time ever in the history of this podcast.
The quiet laugh, yeah. Get the silent laugh. Anyway, so we're not mature.
No.
And so this clip that we got from the ladies at Vocal Fries, which is a podcast about linguistic discrimination, and they do amazing stuff with amazing other people and amazing work. And one of their sort of mantras for their show is "Don't be an asshole," which inspired them to provide us with the following explanation.
Congratulations, Lexitexture, on your 100th episode.
Yeah, that is so exciting, and it's such a beautiful rounded number, and it's definitely something worth celebrating.
Absolutely.
And who are we? What are we doing here?
We're the Vocal Fries.
Yeah.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa.
And we decided to talk about a word from our tagline. Don't be an asshole. So we're going to talk about asshole.
Yeah. Where the heck is it from?
Asshole might come from the 1880s. And it's the I'm going to say North American English variant, because Canadian English is always left out of these conversations, of arsehole.
Oh.
And it means, according to online etymology dictionary, contemptible person. That meaning of contemptible person comes from the mid-1930s.
Wow. I mean, certainly there were other ways to say it, because people did not just start becoming contemptible in the 1930s.
Oh, no. Although something pretty terrible did happen in the 30s, but
that's
yes.
True. Yep.
So apparently earlier the word was a Northern English and Scottish variant of ashhole, which was a receptacle for ashes beneath a grate, which I never knew.
Oh, wow.
Because ashhole to me sounds like the softening of asshole, but...
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Absolutely. Like how a kid might say it, or like in The Good Place, maybe they would have said ashhole, and like they said fork for fuck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I learned a little bit about the word asshole today, which
I did too.
Kind of nice. So thank you for this opportunity, Lexitexture, and again, congratulations on the 100th episode.
So cool. So amazing.
So we just that's it for us for today. We just want to again express our incredulous and boundless thanks to everyone who took the time to come up with and record and send in a clip. It's been amazing to go through them and just to get the response that we did from such a variety of intelligent and hilarious and awesome and super rad people. So yeah, just thank you so much for sending those things in.
I have 2 more thanks.
Yes.
And it's, again, I'm coming back to this, accusations of being cheesy will be gratefully welcomed and noted, and nothing will change because it is who I am as a human being. But thank you so much, all the people that listen to this podcast, that have listened from episode 1, that are perhaps listening to episode 100 as their first foray into Lexitecture. We are 2 chumps who love doing this thing, and we really love that you like it too. And we were super incredulous about the brilliant responses that we got, but we're also super incredulous that we have listeners and we love it. And yeah, thank you for the 100 episodes. And as many of our commentators and helpers and friends said, here's to the next 100 episodes. And of course, last but in no way least, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for doing all the technical stuff. Thanks for putting in all the donkey work, hours long, not always interesting to other people's stuff. Thanks for your incredible flexibility when scheduling these recordings. And thanks for being a really good friend.
Well, and right back at you, except without the technical stuff, because that's, I think we all, we all know our roles here.
That is very much not my jam.
But yeah, no, like it was, as you know, and as people know by now, when it occurred to me that this might be a fun thing to try, it was only going, like, I was like, well, I'm obviously going to ask Amy if she wants to do this. I didn't think to ask you if you had heard of podcasts before I suggested it, which would have been a better place to start. But
it worked.
It's but yeah. So, but I would like to express thanks to you on my behalf, on behalf of everyone else as well, for the work you put in and the laughs and the interruptions, as infrequent and occasional as they are, and just I really like getting to do this. It's a lot of fun, and it's fun because we get to hang out and be nerdy, and, like, as you say, the fact that we have people who are nerding along with us on the other end of earbuds or earphones or car speakers or whatever,
just amazing,
is pretty incredible. So yeah.
And by all rights, we should be celebrating this. We should be, like, drinking ill-advisedly, perhaps even dancing ill-advisedly. In my head, there is a giant word nerd party that kind of should be going on. Stupid geography, of course, means that's not a thing that we can do right now. But hopefully, in the not too distant future, we can raise a glass somewhere at some time and say, hey, remember our awesome 100th episode?
Yes. It will be fantastic. And don't forget to everyone, keep an ear open after the closing theme music, which is coming soon, for contribution from Dustin of Sandman Stories Presents. And just thanks again to Dustin as well. If you're not on Twitter, you may not have come across Dustin. His podcast is great, but he is just the most indefatigable booster of indie pods and podcasters imaginable. Like, he's just always shouting people out.
His dulcet tones are just a joy.
Absolutely. So enjoy that after the closing theme music, and we will see you again next time.
So many thanks, so much fawning. Dude, this has been like an Oscars acceptance speech. And quite frankly, I've always wanted to give one of those, so...
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard in this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Hello, this is Dustin from Sandman Stories Presents. I just wanted to say congratulations to Amy and Ryan on 100 wonderfully nerdy episodes. I've really enjoyed listening to your explanations and the synonyms discriminated and all the weird and wild connections between words. Your passion for words shows through. Now for my word, business. It really hit me in the face after looking at it so many times. I've always had trouble spelling the word business and building because of where the I was placed. Well, when I was listening to some word podcasts and doing some research on my own, I finally heard where the word came from. Busyness, as in the action of being busy. This makes so much sense now, and it will help me not confuse the spelling in the future. Thank you for keeping my mind as busy as a bee, and I wish you have hundreds of more episodes. Congratulations, Ryan and Amy. Thank you so much. Good night.